There was the lake, the place they would go to be alone, to be away from the rest of the world. They would lie under the oak tree and watch the sun go down, or drift in a boat in the middle of the water, lying side by side, looking up at the stars painted across the universe. In the boat, he would look into her blue eyes and comb his fingers through her beautiful red hair. He would smile at her, and she would smile at him. He would kiss her and tell her how beautiful she was. I love you, he would say, and she would say those beautiful words back. One night, sometime shortly after their wedding, they were on the boat again, watching the stars. Emily smiled and giggled as she kissed him. She laid down and continued to watch the stars. Words are flowing like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither while they pass, they slip away across the universe. Emily sang. Joshua chuckled. You're obsessed with that song. What's wrong with it? Nothing. It's just that you've always been obsessed with it. But it's such a great song. I know, but you sing it constantly. Can't you sing something else? I could, but I wouldn't have anything to annoy you with. What? Joshua exclaimed. He tickled Emily's belly as they play fought, laughing like no one was around to hear them. You're something else, Joshua said. The couple sat back in the boat, gazing at the stars. If you can travel beyond the stars, where would you go? Emily asked. Joshua kissed her on the cheek. Anywhere where you are. Emily took Joshua's hand and pointed to one of the stars. Imagine that when we die, we'll be among the stars, all over the galaxies. Let's not think about death, Joshua said. No, no, we're not talking about death, Emily said with excitement. We're talking about life. We're talking about being together forever. But what about till death do us part? That was said at our wedding. I don't take that seriously. We'll always be together, won't we? Joshua looked at Emily, unsure of what to say. He sat up in the boat, picked up her hands, and looked into her eyes. I'll love you no matter what, he said. Even if death means we will part, that'll never change. Emily smiled and kissed him again, and Joshua hugged her. He didn't know if they would be together after death, and he didn't want to tell her that. Emily rested her head on Joshua's chest while he kept his arms around her and kissed her. He sat alone under the oak tree. He looked out to the lake and watched the sun lower from the Pennsylvania sky, remembering when they would be sitting, wrapping their arms around each other. That was 12 years ago. He didn't have the youthful looks anymore. He had a full beard, and while he was in his mid-30s, he looked much older. He looked out the lake, then picked up a stone and threw it out to the water. He watched it skip along before sinking under the surface. The memory of him and Emily out in the middle of the water in the boat together, watching the stars, pictured in his mind. They slip away across the universe, he thought, remembering the lyrics of her favorite song. He thought of her sitting next to him, giggling and resting on his shoulder as she looked out to the lake with him. He filled with joy, but realized it was his imagination. She was gone. They were shopping in downtown in one of the large jewelry stores to buy rings for their 10th wedding anniversary when the shooting broke out. They were near the diamond cases by the entrance when two men came in and waved guns around to get everyone out of their way. Both wore black ski masks, with one of them trying to keep the customers at bay with a 9mm handgun, while the other smashed the display cases with a crowbar and threw jewelry into a backpack. When one of the thieves saw a clerk set off the alarm, he shot him in the head, triggering a reaction of people screaming. The men fired more rounds, one of them shooting the ceiling. Emily stood too scared to move, while Joshua stood by the diamond case with his heart pounding, his entire body sweating. He looked over at Emily, wanting to protect her, but afraid the men would fire at him. After the men finished grabbing whatever they could, they made their way to the exit. Emily stood by the entrance, unable to move out of fear. The men screamed for Joshua and Emily to move out of the way. When they didn't, one of the men blasted rounds at them. Joshua dropped to the floor without getting hit, but Emily was shot in the chest. Joshua tried to hold back his screaming as he pretended to be dead. The men walked out of the store, one of them firing a bullet into Emily's head before leaving. When the men were gone, Joshua crawled over to Emily to try and wake her, blood dripping from her mouth. He tried desperately to keep her conscious and stop the bleeding. He screamed when he realized that nothing he could do would wake her, holding her in his arms. The shock of Emily killed right in front of him traumatized him, even after the story died down in the media after a week. The two men responsible were never found, making Joshua's grief more painful. By the time of her funeral, Joshua had to relive the horrible day all over again as he and members from both their families gathered in front of her coffin. Like Emily had wanted, it was a small Catholic wake prepared by St. Joseph's Church, run by the parish priest, Father Ben. 3 years into their marriage, Emily converted to Catholicism shortly after the doctors discovered she was infertile. Joshua was raised a Protestant, but became agnostic in his mid-teens and became apathetic when it came to matters of religion, so her decision to become a Catholic surprised him. Before that, she was into New Age spirituality and left her family's Christian faith before she went off to college. Shortly after her conversion, Emily replaced almost everything related to her New Age belief with statues of Jesus and Mary throughout the house. One thing that she did keep was her collection of beloved Beatles music, believing it enhanced her newfound Catholic faith. Joshua would still go with her to Mass just to be with her and go through the motions, but had to sit behind whenever she would partake in communion. It never bothered him that he could never take communion with her. Just being with her at Mass was enough for him. Joshua broke down as many guests sang hymns and talked about what they remembered about her. His father led him out to the church lobby to calm him down. "Joshua, it's okay," he said. "We completely understand." "No, you don't," Joshua cried. His father sat Joshua down in the corner of the lobby to calm down, joined by Joshua's brother, Michael. "Is Joshua going to be okay?" Michael asked. Their father, who was a tall, husky man nearing his late 60s and was starting to grow whitish-gray hair, didn't answer him as he hugged Joshua. After Joshua calmed down a bit, his father gave Joshua a handkerchief to wipe his eyes. "Joshua, I do understand," his father said. "Remember when your mom died?" Joshua nodded. "I was 13. Trust me, I know exactly what you're going through right now." Joshua wiped his eyes again with a handkerchief. "But Mom wasn't killed right in front of your eyes." His father remained silent. "Dad, do you think Joshua should see a counselor?" Michael asked. "I think it would help." "I don't need a counselor," Joshua said. "Joshua, I think you should see a counselor," his father said. "I'm not going to a shrink." "Joshua, after what you went through, I think a counselor is something you need right now," Michael said. "No." None of them said anything for a moment. Joshua tucked the handkerchief into his pocket and stood up. "I'm sorry, but I won't," he said calmly. Their father smiled. "I just want you to be okay." He coughed loudly before he placed a medicine tablet in his mouth and swallowed it. "Are you okay, Dad?" Joshua asked. "I'll be fine. Don't worry about me." He tucked his medicine bottle in his pocket. He got up and went back to the wake. Michael took Joshua aside. "You know he has a heart condition, Joshua," Michael whispered. "I know, but still. Don't worry about Dad right now. We're worried about you at the moment." "I'll be fine. I just don't need a counselor, that's all." Michael forced a smile. "Look, go home, get some rest. I'll call you sometime tomorrow to check up on you, okay?" Joshua nodded. "Go wait in the car. It sounds like you just need to be alone right now." Around 3 in the morning, Joshua woke up and sat up against the headboard of the bed. He sat there for a while, doing nothing. then stared to the other side of the bed where Emily used to sleep, looking at the empty spot for a long time before he got up to the bathroom, took a shower, and brushed his teeth in front of the bathroom mirror. He noticed Emily's rosary beads hanging on the towel hook above the mirror. He made himself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen counter, looking over the photo album of him and Emily. He remembered how they first met as sophomores in university out in Philadelphia, with Joshua studying accounting and Emily studying child development to become an elementary school teacher. They were studying at the library when they met and became friends before they started dating. They gradually got to know each other, and over time they fell in love, and they married after graduation and moved to Pittsburgh, where most of Joshua's family lived. There was an elementary school teacher position open there, not being offered in Philadelphia. Joshua found a low-paying job at a UPS warehouse so Emily could work as a teacher, like she always wanted. Even though there was a solid offer from an accounting firm in Philadelphia for Joshua, he turned it down so Emily could have the teaching job in Pittsburgh. The memories of their marriage came back to him as he looked at the photographs. He looked at photos of their wedding, feeding each other the wedding cake and smiling side by side. He had photos of them together when they went to a Beatles tribute concert. He was always faithful to her, even when they discovered later by the doctor that she was infertile because of an infection in her ovaries. Hearing the news devastated her, but he promised he would always be by her no matter what. At first they thought about adopting, but decided against it in the end. He pulled out one photograph of Emily that showed off more of her red hair, lying in a green pasture. He remembered many times when they would talk about heaven, especially after her conversion. He always brushed it off because to him the idea of an afterlife was meaningless. He never told her that because he knew the idea of a heaven made her happy, and seeing her happy was more important to him than arguing with her. It was a question he would regret not exploring when she was alive. Does heaven even exist? He asked himself. Will I ever see you again? After a few months of living alone in an empty house, Joshua quit his job at the UPS warehouse with plans to permanently go to the West Coast. He wanted to get away from Pennsylvania as far as he could. It was too painful for him to be living alone where so many things reminded him of her. He and Emily had always had plans to travel the country, but because of the requirements of their careers and the fact they couldn't afford to go together, they decided they would wait until they had enough. Joshua sold his house and packed his car with any place on the West Coast as his final destination. He paid one last visit to his brother and father and told them that he would keep in touch, despite objections from his father that running away to the West Coast wouldn't solve anything. He told Joshua that he wanted to have all his sons living close to him because he knew that his heart condition wasn't going to get better. Joshua blocked out his father's words, not wanting to even think about the possibility of losing another loved one. He found himself in Colorado 6 days later. He stopped at a coffee shop in a small town outside of Denver. He sat at the counter and waited for his food, sitting next to a man who looked to be in his late 40s, wearing a suit and tie with dark black hair that was turning gray, having a turkey sandwich with a cup of coffee. Where are you from? The man asked with a big smile. Joshua looked at him for a moment, unsure whether or not if he should allow the man a glimpse into his life. Pennsylvania, he finally said. You've come far. Joshua nodded before he took a sip of his coffee. Why so far? The man asked. I'm just on my way to California, Joshua said. Interesting, the man said. He took a sip of his coffee. My wife is dead, Joshua said. The smile on the man's face left. I'm sorry to hear that. Joshua looked at the man. I don't know why I'm even here. The man looked at him, silent for a moment. The radio playing in the restaurant changed its song and began to play across the universe. This was her favorite song, Joshua said. Joshua's food arrived, and he took a bite of it. Her cooking was way better than this, he thought. He stared at his plate, a memory of her cooking her famous beef stew at home with a side of apple pie, coming back to him as the lyrics, "They slid away across the universe," played in the restaurant. He let out a cough before he looked back at the man. "I'm sorry," Joshua mumbled. "It's all right," the man said. "I understand. How did she die, if you don't mind me asking?" Joshua rubbed his eyes and stared off into space. He took another sip of his coffee. "I don't want to talk about it." The man nodded. "I know what it's like to lose a loved one." He took a sip of his coffee. "Years ago, my son was killed at Columbine." Joshua didn't know what to say. He remembered back in Pennsylvania the story of the Columbine shootings on every news station. When they saw the tragedy unfold on television, Emily would express to Joshua how much the idea of kids killing other kids made her cry to the point where she would cling on to him. "I'm sorry about your son," Joshua said. "Not your fault," said the man. "If a God exists, he felt it was his time. Maybe he's in heaven." "I don't know if there is a heaven." The Beatles continued to play in the background as the man asked for his check. "Do you know if there is a heaven?" Joshua asked. The man took a sip of his coffee before he looked back at Joshua. "I don't know," he said. "But if there is one, I hope my son is floating in the clouds with God." 2 days later, Joshua came to the Las Vegas city limits. Driving through the city, he saw a lot of filth in the streets, despite the glimmer of the city lights and the promise of riches and glory. He went to a hotel in the downtown area and booked a room for the night until he could figure out where to go. He entered the room and placed his suitcase by the door and laid on the bed. A large window showed a view of the Las Vegas streets from the 11th floor of the hotel. He could see what the lights of the city covered, people struggling to live in an unforgiving world. Joshua looked out the window with disgust. He saw the bright lights of the city hiding its true colors, and it made him feel worthless. He walked away from the window and sat on the bed. He looked over at the nightstand, noticing the phone book. He looked at it for a while before he picked it up to flip through the yellow pages. He turned the pages one by one until he came up with a list of ads for escort agencies. He viewed the ads for a long time. An hour later, Joshua let the escort in and they sat next to each other on the bed. She had long red hair and a slender body, wearing tight black jeans and a white shirt. He looked into her face and felt nervous. He opened his wallet and placed a $100 bill on the nightstand. "Is this your first time?" the escort asked. Joshua nodded, still uncomfortable with what he was about to do. He took his shirt off and looked at the floor as the escort unzipped her jeans. He looked at her and stopped. The memory of the lake came back to him, and he remembered when he told Emily that no matter what, she would be the only woman he would ever love. He watched the escort unbutton her jeans. She was about to pull them off when he placed his hand on her shoulder to get her to stop. "No, I can't." The escort stared at Joshua for a moment before she unbuttoned her jeans back up. "I can't do this," Joshua said, his face in his hands. "Are you okay?" the escort asked. Joshua wiped his face and nodded. "I'm really sorry for wasting your time." The escort looked at him. "I am really sorry," Joshua said. "I just can't do this." The escort place wiped away tears that formed in his eyes. "It's my wife," Joshua said. "I can't do this to her. I just can't." "Why do you do this?" Joshua asked. "What's that?" the escort asked. "I'm asking you why you do this. You know, this line of work." The escort stood up. "It's just a job to me," she said. "I'm barely getting by. The only reason why I'm doing this is to help my family out in New Orleans." "New Orleans?" "They're still living in a trailer after Hurricane Katrina destroyed our house." Joshua stared into the escort's eyes. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Look," the escort said, "I don't know you. You seem like a nice guy. Whatever trouble you're having with your wife, I hope it gets settled." Joshua didn't say anything. He looked away from the escort and sat down to the floor. "Just take the money and go," Joshua said, not being able to bring himself to look at her. The escort took the $100 bill and left. Joshua went to an internet cafe in the lobby of a hotel after spending the night looking at classified ads. He planned to live on the West Coast, but realized he wouldn't have a job when he got there. He spent the next few hours looking at job openings anywhere in California, mainly for work in shipping companies like FedEx. As he filled out an application, he thought about the escort. He tried to remember what he was thinking when he hired her to come to the room. He remembered the jewelry store with Emily when the two men shot at them, and he remembered having to watch in horror as one of the men coldly shot her in the head and walked out. The only reason I'm doing this is to help my family out in New Orleans, he remembered the escort saying. He paused at the computer, letting what she said sink in. He then typed New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina into the search bar, scrolling the result until he found a website offering volunteer positions to help in the aftermath of the disaster. He called the contact number for the volunteer organization. The outskirts of the city were scattered with trailers and people living in their cars near flooded areas. Joshua began his first month doing whatever he could to get people to safety and bring food to countless families. He would be one of those people who would transport boxes of food in a huge U-Haul truck and get them to impoverished neighborhoods closest to areas hit the hardest. During this time, he would think about Emily and would remember the times when he would go with her on field trips with her elementary school students to the zoo or the downtown museums. As Joshua drove around delivering food and supplies to survivors, he couldn't help but watch the landscape of roads and areas engulfed in water in the aftermath of the destruction of certain neighborhoods. He saw homeless people walking along the dusty roads in the suburbs, some of them with signs that read, "Homeless, please help, God bless you." One particular day, Joshua was on his way to deliver supplies to a group of families when he stopped at an intersection in a neighborhood where hardly anyone was around anymore due to the debris in the flooded roads. He saw abandoned houses and apartment buildings that were damaged by the hurricane. If Emily was here, should we be helping these people with me? He thought. For the first month of volunteering, Joshua would continue to help various families. He grew close to a family of 3 who lost their daughter Nadia when the hurricane hit. The father and mother, Terrence and Caroline, lost their jobs and lived in a rundown trailer near one of the hardest hit areas, barely getting by in order to raise their son Daniel. Joshua would bring them food and try to comfort them in their time of grief. And 3 days of the week, when he wasn't doing other aspects of his job, he would try to help rebuild their house. He would help Terrence with nailing boards and rebuilding and repainting the walls of their house, while he would cook dinner for Caroline while she washed Daniel's clothes. In their time of grief over their daughter, he would tell them stories of Emily, how she was with children, telling stories of their relationship over their 10-year marriage, slowly admitting over time to them what happened to her. "Things will be okay," Caroline would say. "I bet you anything that Emily is greeting our daughter up in heaven." "I hope so," Joshua would mumble to himself. Joshua spent almost 2 years working on and off around the New Orleans area while volunteering. He tried to involve himself deeply in his work, working almost every day, and when his volunteer services were no longer needed, he went to work for warehouses in different shipping companies. He worked so much that he barely ate and grew a full-fledged beard, becoming more and more involved in work so he can try and forget. But he never forgot. He remembered how the man at the jewelry store shot at both of them, lying there on the floor watching Emily get shot, it playing in his mind over and over again. "Why didn't I protect you? Why are you dead and not me?" One day during one of Joshua's lunch breaks at a FedEx warehouse, he received a call from Michael. "Joshua, you gotta go home. Dad's dying." "What?" "His heart condition's gotten worse while you were gone. He's not doing well." Joshua didn't know what to say. "Will you be okay?" "The doctor said he doesn't have much time to live. He wants to see you, Joshua. Please come home. This is really important." Joshua took a leave of absence and made plans to stay in Pennsylvania at his father's house for the next few weeks before coming back to New Orleans. On the way home, he reflected how much his father meant to him growing up. He remembered how when Mom passed away, his father took over and took care of both him and Michael all by himself, never remarrying. Throughout the years, his father would prove himself time and time again to be a loving and caring father, always willing to provide for his two boys and support them, even after he began to develop his heart condition that affected his health, that made doing things difficult for him. And when Joshua brought Emily over to the house for the first time to meet him, his father welcomed her into the family with open arms. Joshua rang the doorbell of the front door of the house. Michael answered. "Joshua, it's been so long," Michael said. Joshua nodded. "I know." Their father laid in the bed, hooked to a medical ventilator. When Joshua came into the room, his father looked up and smiled. "My son," he said, "it's been so long." "I know," Joshua mumbled. He went over to the bed, dragged a chair over from the desk by the entrance, and sat by his father's side. "I'm so sorry for being gone so long." "It's okay," his father said. "You're here, and that's all that matters." Joshua rubbed his eyes and took a deep breath, forcing a smile as he looked at his father. "While you were gone, I'd done a lot of thinking and reflecting," his father said. "I thought about you and why you left. I don't blame you. I probably would have done the same." Joshua closed his eyes and leaned a closed hand under his chin. "I'm so sorry," he said. "Don't be, it's okay." Joshua wiped his eyes. "Can you do me a favor?" his father asked. Joshua nodded. "Sure." "Can you go down to the parish that you and Emily used to go to and ask the priest to give me last rites?" Joshua looked surprised. "You're not Catholic, though." His father let out a cough. "I know, but I don't have much time here, Joshua. Michael knows that, and you know that. I just want assurance that when my time comes, I know where I'm going." Joshua knocked on the door of Father Ben's office. "I'm sorry I've been away for so long," Joshua said when he answered. "Come, son," Father Ben said as he led Joshua into the office. They sat across from each other before Joshua told him about his father and how he had come back to see him in his last month on earth. "I came to see if you'll give my father last rites," he said. Father Ben nodded. "I remember your father. He was there to help when we had Emily's funeral. It broke our hearts when we heard what happened to her." Joshua halfway closed his eyes. He looked away from Father Ben, with the memory of the man at the jewelry store firing a bullet into Emily's head flashing in his mind again. "Are you all right?" Father Ben asked, when tears started to drip from Joshua's eyes. Joshua didn't say anything. "Do you want to talk about it?" Father Ben asked. Joshua closed his eyes as his tears began to drip. "I've been gone for so long. Now I come back, my own father is being taken away, just like Emily. I miss her so much. My own wife, killed right in front of me, gone, just like that. You have no idea how much it hurts." "Have you tried bringing it to God?" "If God exists, I don't know why He would allow it to happen. I never cared about Him. How could I care for a God that allows such horrible things to happen? She wasn't just my wife. She was everything. She was everything to me." Joshua knelt his head. "I know." Father Ben placed his hand on Joshua's shoulder. "I know." He passed Joshua a napkin. "It's hard, I know. It's my fault. It's all my fault." "It's not your fault, man. Not your fault. If I had tried to protect her, she would still be alive. No, it's not your fault at all." Joshua shook his head. "I know for a fact she would still be alive. If I had jumped in the way or grabbed her or whatever, she would still be alive." Father Ben smiled. "Emily's in a better place. You know that, right?" "How do you know that?" "You can only have hope." Joshua just shook his head. "I don't know if I have any." There was silence in the room, with Father Ben giving him another napkin to wipe his eyes. I'll tell you what, he said after Joshua crumbled up the napkin. If you like, we can discuss this more. Would you like to schedule a time to see me so we can talk? Joshua didn't say anything for a moment. I'll think about it. Good, we can schedule a time if you like. You'll be there tomorrow to give my father last rites then? Yes, we can talk it over more then. Okay, thank you, Joshua said as he shook Father Ben's hand. I had a wonderful dream while you were gone, Joshua's father said when Joshua came back and sat by his side. Michael came in the room with a cup of tea and a bottle of pain medication and placed them on the nightstool beside the bed. Do you need anything else? He asked. Their father nodded. I'm fine. I just want to see my son. Michael nodded and left the room. What kind of dream? Joshua asked. His father coughed and pointed to the tea and medication. Joshua placed a medicine tablet in his father's mouth and helped him wash it down with tea. He glanced up at the ceiling and took a breath through the ventilator before he began to speak. I left my body and I found myself in this large room. All of our loved ones were there. So many of our aunts and uncles were there to welcome me, and I saw friends I haven't seen in years. Your mother was there too. How's Mom? Joshua's father smiled. Like when I first met her, she's with God now, Joshua. Joshua forced a smile. That's good, he said as he tried to fight back a tear. I also saw Emily. Joshua felt his throat swallow. My Emily? Yes. How is she? She's doing better, his father said. She was with Mom and the rest of our family. She was talking about how much she misses you. She says she's waiting for you. Joshua let out a genuine smile, but then stopped himself as he remembered that everything his father was saying was a dream. He then forced a smile while keeping it to himself that he had a hard time accepting his father's words. The dream his father described seemed so real that a part of him wanted it so badly to be true. The thought of being with Emily in that place gave him a sense of a possible hope that he hadn't felt in years. He nodded and got up from his chair. The priest will come tomorrow to give you last rites. His father smiled. Joshua was lying on the couch in the living room downstairs trying to take a nap when Michael called him from the kitchen, letting him know that dinner was ready. How have you been? Michael asked 5 minutes into the meal. Joshua stopped eating and looked up at his brother. I've been okay. He took another bite of his pork chops. We're glad to see you again. Joshua nodded. I'm happy to see you, he mumbled without enthusiasm. Michael tried to crack a joke to try and cheer him up, but he did not smile. As Joshua took a sip of his tea, he thought of his father's dream. It became more and more vivid, with the image of Emily standing there in that room, crying out to him. He heard her laughter and saw her smile. He imagined himself in that room with her, standing 5 feet away. Joshua, Emily said, looking at her, standing there for a moment before he walked up to her. Joshua looked at her, standing there for a moment before he walked up to her. Emily, you really here? He asked as his eyes watered. The woman standing in front of him nodded and smiled as she wrapped her arms around him. I've been waiting for you, she said. Joshua smiled as he and Emily kissed. They looked into each other's eyes as music filled the room. You okay, Joshua? Michael asked. Joshua stared at his cup of tea before he looked up at his brother. I'm okay. What did you and Dad talk about, if you don't mind me asking? Joshua didn't say anything for a moment. Dad was talking about a dream he had a while I went to see the priest. Another dream? He's been telling about his strange dreams lately. It's obvious because it's almost his time. Joshua took a small breath. It was a strange dream. It was a dream that seemed so real. I know I've been gone for so long, Michael, and for that I'm sorry. But I just had to get away. It's okay. It's perfectly fine. Joshua took another breath before he continued. After Emily died, I began to wonder. I wondered if all those years of Emily talking about God and a heaven, I began to wonder that maybe, just maybe, she was onto something. Joshua took another bite of his pork chop. I didn't find anything when I was gone. I found a little comfort from helping those people in New Orleans after Katrina, but that's about it. And I come home to see Dad, and he tells me of this strange dream he had about seeing Mom in this place, along with all of our loved ones. But he said that Emily was there, and when he described how she was doing in this place, I felt that I saw her again. You have to remember that it's Dad's time. You know he's bound to say anything strange right now. I know that, but this is different. I feel that when what he was describing might be true. The more I think about it, the more real it seems. It's possible. It's possible that I'll see Emily again someday. Michael let out a chuckle. Oh, that's just Dad again. He's just putting crazy ideas into your head. I'm serious. I'm serious too, Joshua, Michael said. What you're describing is just Dad hallucinating. Michael, do you still believe that there's a heaven? Michael was taken from the suddenness of the question. What? I'm asking you, do you still believe that there's a heaven? Michael said nothing. Do you still believe that there's a heaven? Joshua asked again. Michael stared at Joshua for a while. I have to be honest, Joshua. No, I don't. I stopped believing a long time ago. I just never told you guys, and I'm sorry for that. But the dream he described felt so real, Joshua said, as the thought of him and Emily hugging each other in that room appeared in his mind again. There's no way. There's no fucking way. Come on, Joshua said with a chuckle. You're not starting to believe in that heaven shit, are you? Come on, you know it's ridiculous. Joshua threw his plate of pork chops across the room, smashing into pieces against the wall. Fuck you. Michael jumped out of his chair. Joshua, calm down. Calm down? You expect me to calm down after what I went through? Joshua, don't Joshua me. Don't you dare. Is death really the end of you? Don't you fucking care? Joshua saw a tear run down Michael's eyes. For me, death is the end. When we die, we'll be fed to the worms. I just can't believe, Joshua. It hurts, but I just can't. I just can't believe that when we die, we'll go off someplace where we'll meet up with Dad when he's gone. I'm sorry. I really am. Joshua threw his cup across the room. Get the fuck away from me. Joshua woke up the next morning after having a dream about Emily. He dreamed about the times they had together. He dreamed about when they first met, going to the same college and falling in love, and about their years together. He dreamt about their struggles and how she was always willing to talk things out, no matter how long it took. Memories came back to him of her coming home from work at the elementary school and going on about how wonderful her students were and how heartbroken she was that she could never have a child of her own. He would tell her that he would love her and support her no matter what. He wasn't sure if God existed, but if he did, he would tell her God would be a loving God. In the final phase of the dream, he saw the lake. The moment he woke up, he thought about how much the lake meant to both of them. When he got there, he walked to the oak tree where they used to be whenever they wanted to watch the sunset. He looked up at the oak tree, and it triggered memories of the times when Emily would climb the tree, and he would call up to her to come down. He sat alone under the oak tree and looked out to the lake, again with the memories of being on the boat with her, looking up at the stars. After a while, Joshua got up and went over the hill that had a cliff stretched over the lake. Standing on the edge of the cliff, he looked towards the horizon, peering up to the sky. God, do you even exist? He asked. He looked out to the lake and then up again at the clouds. God, if you're real, why did you do this to me? He screamed. Emily's dead. My precious Emily is dead. Why? Why? He tried to hold back tears. Why did you take her away? Is she truly in a better place? Does heaven exist? When I die, will I live? Will I just sleep in a grave? I went looking for answers, but I found nothing. Nothing, I tell you, nothing. He stared up to the sky and got no answer. "Answer me," he screamed. "Why are you a coward? Why don't you answer me?" He screamed at the top of his lungs, shaking his fist at the sky, the memory of him holding her dead body in his arms flashing through his mind. "Answer me, you self-righteous fucking asshole!" He felt a sickness in his stomach. He coughed and began to feel dizzy, and when he tried to regain himself, he tripped over a large stone and fell off the cliff and into the lake. Under the water, he held onto his lower abdomen to fight off the sickness. He struggled, but then allowed himself to sink to the bottom. Then someone pulled him out, helping him to the shore, Joshua coughing and spitting out water. After clearing his system, Joshua looked over to the man who saved him. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you so much." Joshua shook the water off himself and brushed his hair back. The man wrapped a towel around him. Joshua didn't know where he got the towel from, but he didn't ask. He looked up to the man, questions swirling through his mind. "I don't know who you are." The man leaned down to Joshua's level. He looked into his eyes and he placed his hand on his shoulder. "I can assure you that you know who I am." Joshua stared at the man. Looking into his eyes, he knew that this man was not like anyone he had ever met before. Joshua stared at him, hesitant to do anything, but then smiled and wrapped his arms around him. He looked up to the sky and imagined himself with Emily in the heavens, somewhere across the universe.